You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of OverAnalyzing, the series where I take a more in-depth look at the fictional universes which I love. As you can see by the title of today's video, I'll be talking about the different types of South Park episodes, and which types I think are best. Now, I have talked about this topic on the channel before, and I will link my older video in the description below. However, this I'm going to kind of expand upon it, and maybe reiterate a couple of points, because that old video does have a few issues, particularly audio problems. Not to mention, as I said, there are a few additional points I want to make in this video. So, in my old video, I mentioned that I divided South Park up into several different eras. And the different eras that I said were, Seasons 1 through 5 is the You Killed Kenny era, Seasons 6 through 10 are the Revamped Era, Seasons 11 through 17 was the Uncensored Era, and Season 18 through 20 was the Serialized Era. I think those are still fairly accurate descriptions of each different era of South Park. However, I do feel like the current era, which is what I'm going to be referring to Season 21, since that's all there is at the moment, but obviously there will be more, because Season 21 was kind of a step back from the serialization. It still kind of had it, but they definitely toned it down. South Park itself has obviously changed with time. As the series started out, it was very much a more absurdist, character-driven comedy that still had some political and satirical moments in it for sure, but it wasn't necessarily the crux of it, especially for, let's say, Seasons 1 through 3. In the older seasons, South Park truly felt like it was just some small hick town in the mountains, and a lot of the earlier episodes had things like cryptids and aliens and urban legends and things like that, and honestly, I do miss that the show used to contain that. It doesn't really have that so much anymore. And this was what the first era of South Park was all like. Yeah, it had a few current events and topical things in it, but most of that was just kind of on the side, while the show still focused on the characters, the jokes, and like I said, they had quite a lot more absurdist humor in the earlier seasons. They still had this in later seasons, don't get me wrong, and in fact they had quite a bit of it still, but I feel like it was just much more prominent in the earlier seasons. Now, the Revamped Era, I call it that because that's when they started experimenting with new things. They killed Kenny off for an entire season, and then they moved away from killing him at all. It was at this time that Butters rose to prominence, which is great because Butters is one of my all-time favorite South Park characters. This was still very much a character-driven show at the time, and it still felt like a small mountain town. It had a few expansions here and there, like with the new police force added in, things like that. But it still did feel like it was just some small town that was kind of isolated up in the mountains. It was during this era that we got what is probably still my all-time favorite episode of South Park, and that is the return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers. Now, there are several reasons this is my favorite episode, but the primary ones being, I love Lord of the Rings, and the other primary reason being the fact that it's just a boys being boys episode, which is some of my favorite types of episodes. Unfortunately, you don't really see those too often anymore, although you did get a little bit of that in Season 21, which I'll get to in a minute. I thought that was great. And also, this episode had a lot of Butters being Smeagol, and I thought that was great too. Other episodes in this era were definitely great as well. You had things like Good Times with Weapons, Professor Chaos, and I'd be here all day if I went over each and every individual episode, but let's just say this was definitely a high point. Then you got the Uncensored Era, which honestly felt more like just much of the same. The only reason I differentiate the two, honestly, is because this is when the DVD set started being uncensored, was with Season 11. Now, although I do say it was more of the same, the Uncensored Era is where I feel it really started to get a lot more political-based. Like, much more of the episodes became based on current events and politics, which is fine because that's one of South Park's strong suits. That's how they stay relevant. But it was during the Uncensored Era that you really saw that become kind of the focus of the show. The Uncensored Era also had a lot of amazing moments, and it still felt like a small mountain town for the most part. There were a lot more bigger areas and things like that, and the town did keep expanding. But it did start to feel more and more like a big city. Then we get to the Serialization Era, and in my opinion, the worst era of South Park. Don't get me wrong, I still love this era because I like all of South Park. But honestly, the Serialization Era is where things just kind of took a plummet. I'm not gonna lie, I think Season 18 had sort of highs and lows. It was very experimental because they were adding more continuity than South Park had ever really seen before. And on top of that, it still had a few great episodes. It had things like Go Fund Yourself. It was during this season that we saw some of the not-so-good episodes. For instance, I don't really like the Magic Bush. I honestly don't find it that funny. I like all the stuff with Butters and his dad and the drone, but the whole main plot about Craig's mom's bush, I just don't fucking care. It bores the shit out of me. The little bard song is kind of funny, but even that I was like, meh. Again, I don't hate the episode, because in my opinion, there are no terrible episodes of South Park. It's just this one was kind of meh. Season 19 was honestly a step up from Season 18. It still had the serialization. They even went more full force with the serialization, but honestly, the episodes were much better. In Season 19, it introduced the character of PC Principal, who is honestly one of the better new characters. I love PC Principal. He's hilarious. And it had a lot of great episodes like Naughty Ninjas, and they brought back Officer Barbrady. Although, according to the commentary on Season 19, that bringing Officer Barbrady back was only a temporary thing, basically to write him out of the show, which, hearing in the commentary, actually disappointed me, because I thought they were going to bring him back for good, but no, they were writing him out of the show. But nevertheless, they still had him in it, and Barbrady himself had not been prominent in the show for many years. Then we move on to what is, in my opinion, the worst season of South Park, Season 20. So although the previous two seasons did have elements of continuity and serialization, the stories were really just self-contained, albeit with the continuity. Other than the last 3 episodes of Season 19, all of them had their own story. Season 20, they decided to go full force with the serialization. Season 20 is basically just one big long episode. It's all one story, and it focused on the presidential election. And goddamn did I get tired of hearing about it. I'm gonna be honest, the presidential election is something that people just kept talking about to the point where I just got sick of hearing about it. And when that became all that South Park was talking about, that was kind of disappointing for me. And on top of that, it just wasn't anywhere near as funny. I mean, we didn't really get real Cartman at all in Season 20. He was just kind of, he was a shell of his former self. He was pretending to be a super nice, super PC guy to basically just to get him a girlfriend and to try and be popular. And, it worked, but it wasn't Cartman. We didn't get to see any of his evil conniving or anything. I mean, honestly, they didn't make it very obvious. True, we get a little bit of that in the later parts of Season 20 where he tries to go to Mars so that Heidi doesn't find out that he didn't like the new Ghostbusters movie. But it's like, they had like 3 jokes in Season 20. So, joke number 1, presidential election, ha ha ho hoo ha ha ha. Joke number 2, women are funny, get over it, ha 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 ha. Joke number 3, the member berries. Oh god, do I hate the member berries. The member berries are so annoying. Like, I found them mildly funny at best when they were first introduced, but they just got so overused. Like, Season 20 just kept reusing the same jokes over and over and over again, to the point where I was just like, no, this is kind of shit. It had a few good moments. Like I said, I still like Season 20. It's just, in my opinion, Season 20 is the worst season of South Park, and if I ever were to do a top 10 worst episodes of South Park video, I would combine all of Season 20 into one, just because otherwise the list would be nothing but that. Season 20 is also, in my opinion, a lot more forgettable than a lot of... Anyway, that brings us swiftly on to Season 21, which is great. I fucking love Season 21. Season 21, they decided to kind of back off from the whole continuity and serialization thing. They decided to keep a loose continuity, kind of like Season 6 had and Season 18 had, and just have one plot line kind of carry over throughout the episodes, and that was Cartman and Heidi's relationship. And I really like the way they played that out. It worked out really well. This also had one of my all-time favorite episodes in it, Sons of Witches. In my opinion, Sons of Witches is the best episode from South Park in the last few years. It feels like an older episode, because although it has some political stuff in it, it's very much an undertone, like it's very subliminal. They don't try to push it out there and make it the focus of the episode. Yeah, they do the whole witch hunt thing, but again, it's very, very subtle. It's one of the more subtle episodes, and that's what I like about it. Because when South Park is subtle, I find it much funnier than when it's much more out there and more obvious. All the subtlety of it made it a very good episode. All the crazy stuff with the witches and stuff, it felt like a Season 1 through 3 episode in many respects, because it had all sorts of absurdist and paranormal stuff, which you really just don't see in the show that much anymore. Plus, it was a Halloween special, and I love South Park Halloween specials. Those are some of my favorite episodes. Not to mention Randy was fairly prominent in it, and Randy is one of my favorite characters. So, Season 21 was a step in the correct direction, and it felt like it should. Season 20 is kind of a blemish on it, but honestly, every show is bound to have a few subpar episodes. So yeah, those are the types of South Park episodes, and which ones do I think are the best? Just because, well, personally, I'm more keen to the quote-unquote revamped era, seasons 6 through 10. Those are kind of my favorite, just because I love all the stuff with Butters, and especially the Cartman and Butters dynamic you get a lot. And at the time, the show was still very character-driven. I do feel like the quote-unquote uncensored era, seasons 12 through 17, carried this over as well. So honestly, I'd say that those two are both really great. I'd say if I were to rank each era individually, my favorite would have to be the Revamped Era. My second favorite would be the Uncensored Era. My third favorite would be the original You Killed Kinney era. Then the current era. Then serialized era. So yeah, my favorite kinds of episodes of South Park are typically the boys being boys type episodes, and I love Cartman and Butters' dynamics, because, you know, you got stuff like Osimo, you got Casa Bonita, you got Super Fun Time, which is from season 12, but you get my point. South Park is a show that I feel is still standing strong. It's been on the air for over 20 years and is still going strong. I don't really feel there's been a significant decline in quality other than maybe season 20, and again, they bounced right back from that. But yeah, my favorite episodes tend to be the ones that focus on the characters and just boys being boys. I love that kind of stuff. What are your favorite kind of episodes? Do you like the boys being boys ones? Do you like the more serious issue ones? The ones that tackle political issues? I'm okay with those if they're done right, and most of them are. I just feel like season 20, because it was just kind of one single issue throughout the season, it was just really boring. Overall, I think that South Park isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and I feel like it's going to still be going strong for as long as they decide to keep it. I do miss the small mountain town feel and the absurdist humor of, like, seasons 1 through 3, but nevertheless, I feel like the show is still great and is still within its own golden age. Again, season 20 was kind of a step in the wrong direction, but they, like I said, they bounced right back. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red-Eye, and let me know in the comments what you think. What's your favorite kind of South Park episode? This has been Fugitive Red-Eye, and you have a great day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red-Eye.